Hello and welcome to Learn and Talk English.
It's great to be here.
We're here to help you learn English in a simple and fun way.
Yes, especially if you are a beginner.
Think of this as like a friendly chat.
Yeah, just talking and you're learning.
Exactly. And please feel free to leave a comment or ask a question.
We're here to help.
So one of the things I find interesting is how many new words there are when you're learning English. Have you noticed that?
Yeah, definitely. Even simple conversations can have tons of new words. Like if you're talking about living in a city or living in a village.
That's a great example. Just thinking about that topic, there are so many words to learn.
Like city and village. What do those words mean to you?
Well, a city's usually a big place with lots of people and buildings.
Exactly. And a village is much smaller, usually in the countryside.
What other words come to mind when you think about cities and villages? Let us know in the comments below.
I think of busy for a city and peaceful for a village.
Those are good ones. I also think of crowded for a city. Sometimes cities can feel very crowded. What do you think?
Yes, I agree.
And sometimes when we're talking about things, we talk about the pros and cons. Do you know those words?
Yes, pros are the good things about something and cons are the bad things.
Right. So what would be a pro of living in a city? What do you think?
Well, a pro could be that there are lots of shops and restaurants.
That's a good one. It's convenient to have everything close by.
Yes, and cities often have good transportation systems like buses and trains.
What about a con of living in a city?
A con could be the noise, or the traffic. Cities can be very noisy and busy.
They can be. I find that cities can feel overwhelming sometimes.
Yeah.
How about you?
Yes, sometimes.
It's all about finding what works best for you.
Exactly, and that's why it's interesting to think about the pros and cons of different places to live. What do you think?
I agree. It helps us make informed decisions.
Now let's talk about something that can happen to anyone forgetting someone's name.
Oh, yes. That could be so awkward.
It can be. Have you ever forgotten someone's name? Let us know in the comments.
I have definitely been there. It's especially tricky when you're learning a new language and you're not sure what to say.
Right, but there are some helpful phrases you can use.
Like what?
Well, you could say, I was in a bit of a hurry when we met before.
What does in a bit of a hurry mean?
It means you didn't have much time.
So if you forget someone's name, you can say, I was in a bit of a hurry when we met before, to explain why you don't remember.
Exactly, and it's a polite way to say it.
But a good phrase to remember.
Now, another helpful phrase is contact details.
What are contact details?
Contact details are ways to reach someone, like their phone number or email address.
So you could ask for someone's contact details even if you remember their name.
Yes, it's a good way to stay in touch.
And sometimes we just forget things. It happens to everyone.
It does, and there's a phrase for that. It slipped my mind.
It slipped my mind. What does that mean?
It means you forgot something, but it's a gentle way to say it.
It sounds more polite than just saying, I forgot.
Yes, it does.
So if you forget someone's name, you can say, it slipped my mind.
Exactly. And then you can ask for their name again.
It's a good way to handle an awkward situation.
It is. And sometimes it's helpful to admit that you are terrible with names.
What does terrible with mean?
It means you are not good at something.
So you could say, I'm terrible with names if you often forget people's names.
Yes. It's a way to be honest and maybe even make people laugh.
Humor is always good. What are some other things people might be terrible with? Leave your answers in the comments below.
I think many people are terrible with remembering birthdays.
Or directions.
Yes, directions can be tricky, especially in a new city.
So remember, if you're learning English, don't be afraid to use these phrases.
They can help you in everyday conversations.
And they can make learning English more fun.
Exactly.
Now let's move on to some tips for practicing English.
Okay.
One tip I hear a lot is to talk to yourself in English.
Yes, that can be helpful.
What do you think?
Well, it might sound strange at first.
It does sound a little strange.
But it can really help you to think in English.
So how does it work?
You can narrate your actions or describe what you see around you.
Like what?
For example, if you are cooking, you could say, I am chopping the vegetables now.
Or, I'm putting the food in the oven.
Exactly.
It's like you are having a conversation with yourself in English.
Yes, it is. And it can be a good way to practice your pronunciation.
And your grammar?
Yes. The more you practice, the better you will become.
Okay, so what other tips do you have for practicing English?
Well, another tip is to record yourself speaking English.
That sounds a little scary.
It can be, but it is a good way to hear how you sound.
And to identify any mistakes you might be making.
Exactly. You can listen back to the recording and see what you need to work on.
That's a great idea. But I think I would feel self-conscious recording myself.
I understand, but try to focus on the learning aspect. It's not about being perfect. It's about improving.
Okay, that's a good point. We will continue with more tips for practicing English in just a moment. But first, we want to hear from you. What are some other ways you practice English? Leave your comments below. We would love to hear your ideas. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to Learn and Talk English.
We're glad you're still with us.
We were talking about tips for practicing English.
Yeah, and we left off on recording yourself speaking English.
It can be a useful tool to see how you are progressing.
I think one of the biggest challenges for English learners is the fear of making mistakes. What do you think?
Yes, I agree. Many people are afraid to speak English because they are worried about making mistakes.
It's easy to feel self-conscious, especially when you're first learning.
But it is important to remember that everyone makes mistakes.
Even native speakers.
Yes, even native speakers. It's a natural part of learning.
So we shouldn't be afraid of making mistakes.
Exactly. Mistakes are opportunities to learn.
I like that mistakes are opportunities to learn.
So when you make a mistake, don't get discouraged. Try to learn from it.
How can we learn from our mistakes?
You can ask a teacher or a friend to explain the correct way to say something.
Or you can look it up online.
Yeah.
There are many resources available.
Yes, there are.
Now let's talk about another tip for practicing English, immersing yourself in the language.
What does immersing yourself mean?
It means surrounding yourself with the language as much as possible.
So how can we do that?
Well, you can watch English movies and TV shows,
Or listen to English music and podcasts.
or read English books and articles.
Yes, those are all great ways to immerse yourself in the language.
And it doesn't have to be boring. You can choose things that you enjoy.
Exactly. If you like comedies, watch English comedies.
If you like music, listen to English music.
Make it fun for yourself.
Now, what about vocabulary? Vocabulary is a very important part of learning English.
It is, and it can be challenging to remember all the new words.
It can be. I sometimes feel like I forget words as quickly as I learn them. Have you ever felt that way?
Yes, definitely. But there are some techniques that can help you remember vocabulary.
Like what?
Well, one technique is repetition.
What does repetition mean?
Repetition means doing something over and over again.
So how can we use repetition to learn vocabulary?
You can use flashcards.
What are flashcards?
Flashcards are cards with a word on one side and the definition on the other side.
So you can look at the word and try to remember the definition.
Yes, and then you can check the back of the card to see if you were right.
And you can repeat this process until you have learned the word.
Exactly. Repetition is a very effective way to learn vocabulary.
And another technique is to associate the word with an image or a story.
What do you mean?
Well, if you are trying to learn the word happy,
Yes,
you could picture yourself smiling or doing something that makes you happy.
that's a good idea.
The image will help you remember the meaning of the word.
It can also be helpful to create a story using the new word.
Yes, stories can make words more memorable.
Now let's talk about another important aspect of learning English grammar.
Grammar can be tricky,
It can be, but it is important to learn the rules of grammar.
so that you can speak and write English correctly.
Exactly.
What are some tips for learning grammar?
Well, one tip is to study grammar rules.
You can find grammar books and websites.
That explain the rules in a clear and simple way.
And another tip is to practice using grammar in context.
What does in context mean?
It means using grammar in real-life situations.
So how can we do that?
You can have conversations with English speakers.
Or write emails or letters.
The more you practice using grammar,
The better you will understand it.
and the more confident you'll become.
Exactly.
Now, before we move on, we want to hear from you. What are some challenges you face when learning English grammar? Let us know in the comments. And we will be back with more tips and advice in just a moment. Welcome back to Learn and Talk English.
We are happy you are still with us.
We've been talking about many different aspects of learning English.
Like vocabulary and grammar.
And we talked about some tips for practicing English.
Like talking to yourself and immersing yourself in the language.
Now let's talk about some of the challenges that English learners often face. One challenge is motivation. It can be difficult to stay motivated,
When you're learning a new language.
especially if you're not seeing results quickly.
Yeah, that's true.
So what can we do to stay motivated?
Well, one thing you can do is set realistic goals.
What do you mean by realistic goals?
Don't try to learn too much too quickly. Set small goals.
That you can achieve.
And when you reach a goal, celebrate your success.
That's a good idea. Celebrating our successes can help us stay motivated.
It can. And it can also be helpful to find a learning partner
Someone who can practice English with you
and who can support you.
when you're feeling discouraged.
Exactly. Having a learning partner can make a big difference.
Now, another challenge that English learners often face is
pronunciation.
Yeah, pronunciation can be tricky.
Especially for sounds that don't exist in your native language.
So what can we do to improve our pronunciation?
Well, one thing you can do is listen carefully to native speakers.
You can watch movies
Or listen to podcasts.
and pay attention to how the words are pronounced.
You can also try to imitate the sounds you hear.
And you can record yourself speaking
And then listen back.
to see how your pronunciation compares to that of a native speaker.
Exactly.
Another tip is to focus on the sounds that are most difficult for you,
Identify the sounds that you struggle with.
and then practice them specifically.
There are many resources available online.
That can help you with pronunciation
You can find videos
and audio recordings.
that focus on specific sounds.
And you can also ask a teacher
Or a tutor.
for help with pronunciation.
Now let's talk about one more challenge that English learners often face.
Okay.
Fluency.
Fluency is the ability to speak English smoothly and naturally.
Without hesitating too much.
It's a goal for many English learners.
But it can take time and practice to achieve fluency.
So what can we do to improve our fluency?
Well, one thing you can do is practice speaking English as much as possible.
Find opportunities to talk to native speakers.
Or to other English learners.
You can join a conversation group.
Or take an English course.
The more you practice speaking,
The more fluent you will become.
you can also try to think in English.
Instead of translating from your native language.
This will help you to speak more naturally.
And it will also help you to understand English better.
Now, before we wrap up,
We want to remind you.
that learning English is a journey
It takes time.
and effort,
And patience.
but it's a rewarding journey.
And it's a journey that you can enjoy.
So keep practicing
Keep learning.
and keep having fun.
We covered a lot of ground today.
We talked about many different aspects of learning English
And we shared some tips and advice.
that we hope will be helpful to you.
Remember, learning English is a process.
It takes time and effort.
But don't give up.
Keep practicing and you'll reach your goals.
And we are here to help you along the way.
If you enjoyed this episode, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. We will be back with more tips and advice for learning English soon. Thanks for listening.
See you next time.